So, at first glance, it sounds fairly easy. Do a video about the I-400 class in the year of the aircraft carrier. Let's be honest, these are the largest pre-nuclear submarines ever built. They're the largest submarines prior to World War II. And there are probably going to be some people going, well, are they the largest? Yes, they were the largest. In fact, they were so large that their safe diving depth was 82% of their own length. I.e., they could go down roughly 100 meters. They were roughly 20 something meters long. Think about that. You come down at too steep an angle, well, you might not go back up again. And yes, I do realize there have been some additions and changes behind me. We're still in the process of sorting out the move, and I've just taken delivery of a whole load of bookshelves from Naval, so that's going to help me start sorting out the books. So I do apologize for the mess, but yeah. So, the I-400s. A waste of resources, a concept before its time, or worse of all, an idea executed too late. Well, that's an interesting thing to get into, and, well, I'd like to point out something. I think one of the troubles is we look at them and people look at them as aircraft-carrying submarines. Don't think of them like that. Think of them as an early attempt to make, not even an SSGN really, although you could argue that, but more an attack sub with its strike capability of having some Talons attached, some Tomahawks. It's more sort of that level of capability you're looking for. Yes, you would love to have an SSGN's capability, but that's beyond the technological reach at the time. So what they're looking for is something which can turn up where you're not expecting it, when you're not expecting it, and launch a strike from out of the blue. That might not be the heaviest strike, it might not be the largest strike in the world, but it's going to do some damage, because it's going to be targeted on critical infrastructure, or it's going to be targeted in such a way to cause maximum effect for minimal effort. So that is what we're really dealing with. And that's what really scares some people when we talk about them, because you're looking at them and looking at so much effort being expended to get what is, in conventional military terms, a marginal capability. And why is it a marginal capability in terms of conventional military terms? Well, when you're fighting a total war, being able to deliver a load of pinpricks doesn't seem like much. Yes, you can cause a lot of embarrassment for politicians. Yes, you can cause a lot of embarrassment for a country by going and attacking things like refineries, ports, canal locks, all those things which are vital arteries and sinews of war, and which often are many, varied, spread about, and destroying them can have a cumulative damage, but actually protecting them all can be very, very exhausting resources. So often you might be tempted to rely on other things for your defense, i.e. depth, i.e. your ability to see a large enemy task force coming, i.e. the fact you're already attacking the enemy home island, so why are they going to come and do this to you? All those things are things which you might do and might rely on. But this is where this question comes in, and I want you to think about the title the whole way through this. Now, when Jessica Brisbane put forward this, she said, were they anything other than a huge waste of resources? Well, there's actually three potential answers. Yes, they were a huge waste of resources. They were a concept before their time, or worse of all, an idea executed too late, in which case they are also a waste of resources. In fact, all these options are a waste of resources, but there is just being a waste of resources, a good idea but they couldn't execute it at the time, or an idea which they executed too late for their need. Now with the I-400s, would argue very strongly, and that is partially the case I'll be making the whole way through this, that actually this is a concept which came too late. Because when I was looking at this class, I was thinking about the battle plan, I was thinking about the purpose of Pearl Harbor, I was thinking about all the strikes, and I've discussed this before. My view on Pearl Harbor was it was an attack which was both too successful and not successful enough. It caused too much damage to the Americans for them to come charging full fleet after the Japanese into the trap of all the attrition warfare, all the operations they had planned to wear down the American fleet so they could have a decisive battle against the denuded American fleet and possibly win. But it was also not successful enough in that it didn't do so much damage that it knocked out Hawaii for a long amount of time as far as American fleet operations were concerned. And so, frankly, the American carrier raids could carry out, all sorts of operations were able to carry out, which really started to limit the overall capability of the Japanese fleet and expose it to the problem it was always going to be faced with, the fact that it just wasn't big enough and they weren't able to build anything big enough to deal with the sheer mass available and the infrastructure mass available to the two largest powers in the world. That is, the British Empire and America. Both those powers had far too much of a mass for pretty much anyone in the treaty area to really fight them at sea in anything like a long-term traditional naval engagement. They just did. It's logistics. It's, yes, you've got one of the world's best cruisers. Great. We've got half a dozen of the world's 90% cruisers able to come and fight you. Who's going to win the fight? Oh, and by the way, we have another half a dozen behind them, and another half a dozen behind them, and another half a dozen behind them. How many have you got behind you? That's the scenario we're talking about. It's often said that logistics wins wars. Well, infrastructure underpins logistics. Your industrial complex underpins your logistics. Your ability to move that stuff and to build that stuff underpins your logistics. If you've got a lot of those things, you can have a lot of logistics, and then you can win you can win the wars. But that's also where these submarines come in, because for them to be really useful, you had to be able to go anywhere in the world, you had to be able to be independent, and you had to be able to strike independently. For the utility of these submarines, they had to be able to make their way round enemy forces. They didn't want to engage them, they wanted to go round them and embarrass them from behind. They did not want to get into a stand-up fight. This is not a submarine you want to stand up fighting with anyone or anything. It's too big. It's too ungainly. You don't want that. But you do want the range, because these were supposed to be able to attack the American Atlantic harbours. Now that's a pretty interesting concept. And honestly, there is also the argument that these are the truest form of a cruiser submarine as it was evolving. Because, again, aircraft carrying submarines, and as said, don't think of it as an aircraft carrier, think of it more as trying to get a capability akin to a modern SSN or SSK, and that's a modern nuclear attack submarine or diesel attack submarine, with some six or a dozen Talams, that's Tomahawk-like missiles or other cruise missiles, as part of its weapons fit. Think of it like that. So this is the capability. This is the equivalent capability of trying to get that capability in the 1940s of being able to put that anywhere in the world. By the way, this again makes it very interesting when you start looking at some modern submarines and people start talking about their potential ranges, and you go, well, we know the size of a submarine which was built to go around the world in the 1940s, when things were very different in terms of construction and depth of expected operation and all those things. And that was 5,000 odd tons. How big's your submarine? If it's not in the order of that, and it's an SSK, i.e. diesel submarine, the odds are it's not a globe-trotting submarine. It's kind of like when we're talking about warship designs and we talk about certain categories. We know once you're getting to about 10,000 tons, you're talking about a vessel which is capable of deploying pretty much anywhere it needs to in the world, whenever it needs to in the world, and being a solo operator. Yes, you can do that on 6,000 tons in a more limited way, but once you get to 10,000 tons, you can do it in a general purpose capability kind of way. And once you're getting over that tonnage, you're just adding in more capability. So, shameless book plug, and I do this in every single video, so I'm not going to apologise, but I do it in every video because I'm a British academic. And we are promoted, we are hired, pretty much everything on how well our books go. And I like my book. This is my first book. It's been out for a couple of years. There are more books which I hope to come to join it, but in that time I've had a mum ill, a sister ill, I've been ill, and moved house. So yeah, things have been a bit delayed in getting the follow-ups going, but they're coming. Hopefully they'll be out at Christmas as Kindle Direct Publishing, so you'll have more books to go from, and I'll be able to advertise more than just a single book. And I have already put this question out, but I am putting this out again. Does it become the Shameless Books plug, or still the Shameless Book plug? I'm leaning towards the latter, because I think I'm still plugging book. But should it be books? Because it'll be multiple books. But Shameless Books plug doesn't roll off the tongue as much as well as Shameless Book plug. It's a question for you. But thank you everyone who's bought them, and if you haven't, I highly recommend it. If you are interested in the genesis of the modern destroyer as far as the Royal Navy is concerned and the history there, it goes from the tribal, battle and daring classes and goes through them and how they came about. It does focus in on the British ones, and that is because it was put together during COVID, and I couldn't get to Canada and Australia to properly look at their primary sources. And the stuff where I did have primary sources about, I did put in there. But I'm not promising to discuss the Canadian and Australian ones, because during COVID I couldn't get there physically. And the book had a deadline. So it's got plenty in there, trust me. There's just room for a couple of extra chapters. And I have visited Canada and Australia, and I hope to go back to both again someday to see the HMCS Haida, the last remaining tribal class destroyer in the world, which is in Canada, and HMAS Vampire, which is the last remaining daring class destroyer in the world, and there doesn't seem to be any battle class destroyers surviving. I'm as close to 100% sure there's not a battle class surviving as you can be with the various navies they served with, and the fact that sometimes things end up in random creeks. But as far as I know, no battle class survives. I want to add those sections in though someday, and if it sells enough to get to a third edition, hopefully I'll be able to add those bits in. It's up to second edition already. And whilst I'm on the topic of books, Lee Furno Books, Pannier Market, Tavistock, it's closing down at the end of September. And if you don't know it, in Tavistock, which is in Devon on the Devon-Cornwall border, it's a wonderful bookstore in the corner of the market, and it's got massive books. I think that's a picture of Lee. I found this on their Instagram pictures, so I'm just using one of their own pictures. And if I just give you an idea, I was driving through there this week, and I picked up Critical Convoys by Jürgen Rohr, which of March 1943, which I've been hunting for a while, and I found a copy in there for $7.50. Shadows on the Horizon, The Battle of Convoy HX-233 by W.A. Haskell, another good book. And Ships Without Names, which was the story of the Royal Navy's tank landing ships of World War II by Brian McDermott. And there are lots of other books there, and I would have dearly loved to spend more, but I'm spending quite a lot this month on IKEA bookshelves, and I don't want to have to spend even more on them. And yeah, there are a lot of bookshelves having to be bought. And the thing is, it's a wonderful bookstore. Now, Lee isn't, as I understand it, is not going out of work completely. What he's planning to do is carry on with going to book fairs and those things and selling books through them and other large markets. But he's stopping running the store in Tavistock, which has been 7 days a week. For as long as I can remember, I've been going there on the trips up and down between from Cornwall to Surrey, and wherever else I've been going. I've always stopped in Tavistock, I've always stopped in to go see Lee and buy books off him, because he always has an absolutely exceptional collection. He also, according to my mother, has a wonderful collection of vinyl, and she's very annoyed that I didn't buy her any when I was there this week, and possibly will be heading back there very shortly to buy some, because he has absolutely marvellous taste. So if you're interested and you're in the Devon, Cornwall area and you want some really good books, I highly recommend you going see Lee. He closes at the end of September, so go see what you can find there. There are some books I have my eyes on, but I'm not sure if I'll be able to get the money and time, because that's what I always loved about this bookstore is you will open a book up and it will be a pound, and then you'll open the book which was next door to it on the shelf and that'll be £100. He does value each book, as each book to him is special, but he's also honest with each one's pricing. And the ones which are £100, well, ones which have things like some really interesting signatures or beautiful collectible books, and he takes care of them all, and he sources really great books. So yeah, if you're interested, please go have a look. So with that in mind, let's get on back to the I-400s. So, you okay? Yes. Right. The I-400s, as said, roughly 5,000 tons, or 5,307 tons on surface, 6,670 tons submerged. They are big, i.e. they are bigger than some cruisers. Notably, of course, the Aerofuser class, roughly 5,220 tons in standard. So let's be honest, that's less than the that's less than the surfaced weight, and at 6,715 tons full load, let's be honest, the cruisers only have 45 tons. This is Penelope and Aurora's figures, of course. 45 tons in their full load on the submerged displacement. And there isn't as much between an Atlanta and a Dido as this class as the cruisers might like to think. There isn't as much as they might like to think. So these are big submarines. Really big submarines. And to do that, they have a range of 37,473 nautical miles. They can go there and back to Pearl Harbor multiple times, or the west coast of the United States multiple times. They can go anywhere in the world. They are the size they are because of the fuel they need to carry, and because of the weaponry they need to carry. For that size, you really would be thinking it might be going to have a much bigger crew, but no, it's just 144. They have 3 Aki M16A1 Seren airplanes. They have 8 forward-firing torpedo tubes, and they don't really carry a lot of ammunition either for them. So it's not really the most heavily armed for its size vessel. Their speed is 18-ish, 0.7-ish knots. But let's be honest, usually 18-ish knots on the surface is nothing dramatic, and 6.5 knots submerged means they would be facing trouble trying to get in and out of the Gibraltar Straits. So they're not super fast either. What they are, their entire party piece is that range. It's the reliability of their engines. It's why they have 4 diesels and 2 electric motors, and why they have multiples of everything. And their size is to accommodate the fuel and to accommodate the aircraft to an extent. But all these things are built around the range, around the dream. The problem is, though, and I will say this, the problem starts off with originally they were going to design to carry 2 aircraft. Eventually what they do is actually modify some other vessels to carry 2 aircraft, but they decide 2 is not enough early on and they go for 3. They've canted the island off to one side, which never has a good effect on stability in submarines. It really, really doesn't have a good effect on stability in submarines. Never has done, never will be, though. And honestly, there is the problem that the idea truly is submitted in January 1942. It's been started being worked on earlier, but it's submitted January 1942. Now, think about how we use SSNs and SSKs when they're launching those missiles. They're launching those strike missiles, those land attack weapons today. They're usually part of the very initial strike. They're usually part of the D0 or D+1 attacks. There is a reason for that. The moment those systems strike, A, they reveal their position, and B, usually, after a war has started, everyone's security arrangements go a lot higher. And what can be achieved with a pinprick at the beginning of the war, or when the war just is starting, especially if you're surprised on your side, takes something closer to a sledgehammer as time goes on. So there is a reason for all of that. And this is the problem. The problem here is this is a design which is now coming into cannot come into service at the time it's going to be most useful, because it is now starting late. It is an idea which would have tremendously complemented earlier Japanese plans, and maybe Soroku Yamamoto, who pushes it forward, had an idea for how to use it. But unfortunately, he dies in 1943. He gets killed by the Americans. Very simply, as pretty much anyone else would in the situation, they learn where he's travelling, and they stick some fighters in the path of his aircraft and go, let's see what happens. Well, with the loss of him, everyone else is going, why are we building these? They start out as 18. And the idea was, if you had 18, you could maintain a constant flow of them turning up off the American seaboard, off the west coast of the American seaboard, and constantly attacking things, constantly attacking terminals, constantly attacking infrastructure, constantly causing trouble. And that is true, you could do. They could be doing a constant cycle there and back, and they had enough fuel they could do the trips there and back multiple times before they need to be refueled. Which is great for a country which is short of fuel, but it does mean, interestingly, they could also be operated from places which weren't short of fuel. For example, you could have operated these from Singapore and had them going all the way to America and going back. As long as you could keep the ammunition supplied to Singapore for their aircraft and their weapon systems, you had enough fuel sitting in Singapore to keep them fueled and keep them going. I'm sure that didn't go through Yamamoto's mind when he was ordering their design and put specs. But the point is, what happens under that scenario? What happens if these are providing a constant flow of ships, well, boats, as we call submarines, off the western seaboard of the United States? Well, let's consider the aircraft. And really, of the aircraft, there are only two things that matter about it. Speed matters in terms of its ingress and egress, but the thing is, when you consider the sheer size of the American western seaboard, and the fact the amount of infrastructure would cost and the effort it would cost to set up something like chain home along the western seaboard and the eastern seaboard, and to cover the Panama Canal zone, and probably also the southern border of the United States, because they could nip across Mexico's airspace, because let's be honest, Mexico doesn't have the best airspace security this time, or Canada as well. You're talking about a massive effort for dealing with these aircraft, and yes, your aircraft are probably going to be faster, better fighters. But again, where are they going to be based? How many are you going to have based? Where are they going to be? What are they going to, what's their alert status going to be? It's a huge effort to deal with these aircraft. So the thing that really matters is their range, which officially is 641 nautical miles, but if they are not carrying their pontoons because, they've decided that instead of going through the slow process of getting the aircraft back aboard the boat, they're going to just ditch the aircraft and recover the crew, then their range increases, as does the speed. And if you're not going through the task of actually recovering them at all because they're doing a kamikaze operation, well, then the range goes up even more, because they definitely don't carry the pontoons at that point, so they don't have the weight from them, and they of course aren't bothered about returning to the submarine. And their bomb load, well, it's a Type 91 torpedo, or two 250 kilogram bombs, or one 850 kilogram bomb. Now, that's not the greatest bomb load in the world, is it? It really isn't. But again, this is about pinpricks on infrastructure. Think about 3 or 6 of these if you send a pair of submarines. 3 or 6 of these. Maybe with 6 250 kilogram bombs and 3 850 kilogram bombs hitting a large oil refinery. The odds of starting a fire, which is going to do a lot of damage, very high. The odds of putting that refinery out of commission for weeks, if not months, very, very high. And that's what you have to think about when you're considering this. So, the aircraft, not the greatest aircraft in the world. Not a bad aircraft, but not the greatest aircraft in the world. Doesn't have to be. It's kind of like the story with the Tomahawk cruise missile. It was earth-shattering in 1991. These days, it's still a perfectly useful missile. 30, 40 years later. It's been modified and upgraded during that time and changed around. It's still useful. Is it the world's fastest Talon? That's tactical land attack missile. No. It's not. Does it need to be? Nope. What it needs to be is a capable system that it's going to be a problem for you to deal with. Because the fact is, you wouldn't be just facing one attack of these at a time. You wouldn't just be facing one pair of submarines. If you have the full 18, there could be 3 of those pairs of submarines operating off your coast at any one point. Launching a strike, recovering their aircraft, or not, however they're doing the aircraft operation. And you think about, again, the size of the western seaboard of the United States. Now, again, I have discussed this before. If you're building submarines of the size and scale of the I-400 class, realistically you need another set which are of that size, which are mine-laying submarines. And you need them doing exactly the same thing, dropping off a huge amount of mines off critical ports, at the same time as these I-400s are doing the airstrikes. But again, how much help is that going to be in 1944-45 versus in 1941? In 1941, the US has nowhere near the forces, nowhere near the capability it will have in 1944-45. It has nowhere near the defensive depth it has in 1944-45. So really, the scale of the problem changes, and the utility of those pinprick attacks changes. So, the conception, and I know I've already discussed this, but I really want to hammer home what these vessels are conceived to do. They are conceived as something which was going to take the fight to the United States mainland. They were conceived as something which was going to keep the US on the back foot. Keep them concentrating in their own backyard, on their own coast, so they couldn't provide the forces, put forward the forces to go and do what they needed to do. Think about it from a point of view of destroyers. If you're not thinking about anything else, just think about the destroyers. Think about all those destroyers escorting carriers, escorting battle groups, escorting convoys. What happens if even half those destroyers are required to provide protection for the coastline, to patrol the coastline for these? Because that's got to be part of your job. Yes, you might go for long-range maritime patrol aircraft, but you're also going to want destroyers, because a maritime patrol aircraft flies over an area. A destroyer, you can sit in an area and it can watch it. But you've got a lot of sea to watch. If you're using half your destroyers for that, you've lost a large percentage of your fleet. And you're going to have to build that many more ships. Or cut your operations by that amount, that chunk, until you do have more ships in service. These systems are not necessarily about the actual physical damage they cause, although that can be tremendous and can have significant political effect, because let's be honest, again, if America is under attack and if you're blowing up their fuel refineries and everything on their own mainland, that's probably going to have an impact on the national political debate. I'm fairly sure Europe first starts to seem less attractive under that scenario, and I'm just putting this out there. But you could also have some very interesting politics in terms of the debates about what's going to be done, and what's getting funded, and what the priorities for operations are. It's very easy to send forces a long way away when you are not being attacked. But when you're being attacked, even in a small way, justifying, oh yes, we're sending a division over there. Well, if you'd had that division on the coast, perhaps they wouldn't have bombed us. That division's not going to stop this. Division of Marine troops are not going to stop this kind of attack. But that's not going to have any impact on the political debate. Because there are going to be politicians who are just going to be trying to score points. There are going to be journalists who are just trying to get... Well, it's not clickbait headlines in those days, but let's be honest, they are just headlines. Still, Roosevelt sends Marines away! We get bombed the next day! You can hear it now. So, this is something which could cause tremendous trouble within a democracy. So you have to evaluate it as much as a psychological warfare weapon and a political weapon as an actual military weapon system. And I would argue this is why it continues under construction after Yamamoto is gone. Why they don't stop them completely. Because others see its value in that role. I think, again, building 18 such vessels to maintain that flow of constant attacks, that is a very grand scheme, but again, is it necessarily something sensible to do during the war, when you have other requirements? If you start off, and by the way, I'm going to be open about it, today's question literally is going to be, Yamamoto gets the 18 of these, but he gets them in service for June 1941. So all 18 are in service in June 1941. And yeah, the details can be as vague as they were about the Yamata class. Basically, they're in service. No one's quite sure what they are, what they're doing. They've all got free aircraft. What happens? My thinking is that it makes whatever happens in the operations around Pearl Harbor time even more spectacularly problematic for the Japanese long term. But I'd like to hear what you think. I'd like to hear how you think the world reacts to that. Also, I think it might change perceptions at that time of the I-400 class in terms of their value, but also might change some of the perceptions of some of the German attempts to attack the American Eastern Seaboard and other German operations, because one of the things that's often forgotten in World War II is that really, whilst the Germans get a lot of credit for their U-boats, there were a lot of very good submarines and a lot of very good submarine designers around the world, and there are a lot of very interesting vessels. Very interesting vessels. That's why I've got this title now titled The Translation, because you've got this concept and what's actually available, what's actually built. And one advantage they have in terms of this class is that it managed to stay tremendously close to its original vision. There are not a lot of adaptations, there are not a lot of good idea fairies wandering around going, oh, let's add this, let's add that. No. It manages to work through those things. Now, doesn't necessarily make things perfect for them, though. Now, leaving aside I-400, which was completed shortly before the war ended, but had been converted into a milk cell or a submarine tanker, which is actually another good use for this size, and it's one of the reasons why this size submarine is actually potentially very useful, especially for a Pacific War, because, as I said, you could have used this size submarine, you could have adapted design to be a mine-layer, you could have adapted design quite easily, as they did with the I-402, to a tanker. Why? Because it's got a lot of space. It has a double bubble figure of 8 hull to provide with strength for launching aircraft on top. It has a special trim system which was supposed to allow it to loiter, submerged and pretty much stationary within the water, to allow them to await the return of their aircraft so that they would be in roughly the same space the aircraft launched from, because they were supposed to launch, fly to their target and return by dead reckoning. Similar system as they used for their cruisers, and it worked fine enough for their cruisers, but let's be honest, a submarine is a lot smaller than a cruiser. However, the system was noisy, and frankly most of the crews were very sure they weren't going to use it. They also had demagnetization cables. So fun trying to say that word without coughing. They ran the whole way along from the stern to the bow planes, and they were, again, the system was designed to protect against mines, to allow them to perhaps operate nearby or maybe even from within an enemy minefield. Although, interestingly enough, the reason why I-401 is able to be fitted with a snorkel is because it had been damaged by a mine. And so I-401 is one of the ones which was complete before war began, and she's actually fitted with a German-made snorkel. They're all fitted with German-made periscopes, apparently, which were brought through the blockade. They also had a Japanese-produced anionic tile, or rather coating. This was based on some of the information they'd shared with the Germans, some of the information they got from the Germans, but it was also using a lot of their own research. And that's why they are made of a completely different composition than the German ones. So, it was really interesting reading this and reading about this class, because the amount of people go, well, they got the German system, and you go, no, they didn't. They got some of the research from the Germans. They were quite happy to use that, but they also had some of their own research, and the materials and substances they use are completely different than the Germans, because they've got access to different ones, so they can't use the same ones. So they have to develop their own. It's a case of, we've been told that this is possible, is almost the level of researcher's utility. We've been told this is possible, and this is the rough structure we've aimed for. Lovely. Now go find all the ingredients that you're going to use yourself, and you've got access to none of the same ingredients, and go and see if it works. It's always fun, therefore, when people go, oh, it's entirely from the German. No, because it couldn't be. They have all sorts of other fun things. They have a crane that was stowed in a sort of recessed compartment on the forward or port side. They have a lot of guns, as already discussed. You know, they have a lovely, great big 5.5 inch or 140mm Type 11 deck gun that theoretically has a range of 15 kilometers. Theoretically. It's kind of like their radar set theoretically has a range to detect aircraft at 80 kilometers thanks to having 2 aerials and other systems attached. The reality is probably not so beneficial and probably unlikely to detect them at 80 because, let's be honest, that's only if they're flying very high. If they're at all close to the Earth's surface, then they're going to be hidden by the Earth because it's round. And submarines don't have that higher height to start from. What I found really interesting, and have always found interesting about these ships, these boats, they're so big, it's so tempting. When the moment is this size in this period, you automatically think ship, and it's a boat, it's a submarine. It's so strange to get your head around. they have a huge hangar space. And it's on the top deck, and it's cylindrical. It's 31 meters long. That's 102 feet. It's 3.5 meters or 11 foot in diameter, and it's got a 2-inch or 51 millimeter thick rubber gasket around its door to waterproof it. What I really love about the door is from internally it can be opened hydraulically, but externally there is a large hand wheel connected to a rack and spur gear which can open it up. So basically you have the fancy hydraulic system, and outside you also have a we can wind this and get this open system. And that's one of the interesting things to me. Normally, the easy way to tell the Navy's designs of submarines apart from each other and try and narrow it down if you're just given the bare facts on a submarine is to ask about backup systems, because normally the navies which have been operating large number of submarines during the 1920s and 30s will have always the new fancy system and a reliable secondary system. The navies which haven't been operating large numbers of submarines in the 1920s and 30s and are suddenly growing their surface will go, we've got this new piece of kit, we know it's going to work, we're going to 100% rely on it. It's almost as if you need to go through a few near accidents and issues before you go, look, I realise this system is utterly boring and utterly mind-numbingly straightforward, but it's pretty much guaranteed to work. So whilst I love the brand new system and I want to use the brand new system whenever possible, because it's a far better, far more efficient, far more crew-friendly, far faster system for us to get the aircraft on and therefore minimize our time on surface and all those things. Can we have the backup, please, in case it goes wrong? That takes a level of experience and a level of authority within an organisation to be able to go, you know that new shiny idea you have? Yeah, that's great, but still put in the backup, please. That's what the Japanese certainly have going on here. Well, I won't say that's a hard and fast rule for all submarines designed by all the powers who've been operating large number of submarines in the 20s and 30s, or even a hard and fast rule for the nations which weren't operating large number of submarines in the 1920s and 30s. But it's a rule of thumb guide which works a goodly amount of the time. The reality is you have two get into service and two of the modified vessels. And that means you cannot really do a lot with them. You really don't have the capability or flexibility to do a lot with them. You aren't able to go and keep up that constant pressure on the American seaboard, and whilst they have plans, and I'll discuss those next, they really can't achieve a lot at the time they're doing it. By the time they're entering service, by the time the capability is actually there is not much they can do with it. Because the war is now being decided by huge fleets, and Japan doesn't have a huge fleet anymore. Their carriers, their naval aviators, large numbers of their forces are already gone by the time these are available. When these would have made an exceptional capability for drawing away American resources and Allied resources so that that fleet could fight a major battle. Again, imagine Midway or Coral Sea, where the Americans have access to half the destroyers, or would that even happen if the Americans didn't have enough destroyers to escort their fleets? But by the time you're talking about in 44-45, the US Navy is commissioning destroyers at a rate which frankly frightens even the Liberty ship numbers in some regards. The sheer amount of warships coming into service from Allied shipyards by the point you are talking about in 44-45, when these come into service, It's overwhelming. It's America, it's Britain, it's Canada, it's Australia, it's India. There are shipyards all over the world churning out destroyers, corvettes, frigates, sloops. There are factories all over the world churning out long-range maritime patrol aircraft. There are factories churning out radar sets. Would it be easy to implement a protection system in 1944-45? No. Would it be a lot easier in 44-45 from an infrastructure perspective, from an actual production perspective, than in 1941? Oh, yes. Because you've already got production producing hundreds of these sets. It is far easier to scale up hundreds than to scale up tens. If I'm producing 500 sets and I want to produce 600, that's an increase of 20%. If I'm producing 20 sets and I want to produce 120, that's an increase of 500%. It's the same number, but one's a lot more difficult to do and from a factory perspective than the other. So the reality is, the idea comes too late. The idea is an excellent idea, but it's not the right time. And that then gives us the point of, is it a waste? Are they a waste of resources? Well, realistically, to judge that, we have to look at the operations that they were conceived to be able to take part in. They were talking about the Panama Canal strike. They were talking about Luffy Atoll. They were talking about Operation PX, aka Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night, and various other things. And so we're now going to talk through those. Now, the Panama Canal strike is actually something which is really interesting, because, especially early in the war, it could have been devastating. And the Japanese put a lot of effort into it. They talked with prisoners of war, they talked with tourists who'd been there, they talked with Japanese engineers who had been there, including one engineer who had worked on the construction and then had been forced to return to Japan because there are some discussions around whether or not they went back to Japan willingly or they were basically forced out of their company due to jealousy of colleagues at the company they're working. There's all sorts of interesting stuff around that particular piece of history, but all we know is that when they went, they took hundreds of documents on the canal with them, and they handed them over to Naval General Staff. These included full blueprints of the canal structures and construction methods used. So the Japanese Navy had a very good idea. A very good idea about what was required to cause damage to the canal structures. And they studied it. And they worked out which locks, and would be cause most damage. Miraflores on the Pacific side was considered the most vulnerable to aerial bombing, but Gatun locks on the Atlantic side would cause the greater damage, as it would be harder to halt any outflow of water. Oh! Your brother appears to have returned, along with Sissy. Now, this attack is where it gets really interesting in terms of talking about the range of the aircraft. One of the reasons why earlier I mentioned the fact that those ranges change depending on whether they're carrying floats and depending on other circumstances. Because the plan for the Panama Canal strike not only used I-400 and I-401, also was going to use I-13 and I-14, two of the adapted vessels which have been adapted to a sort of aircraft carrying role. And the idea was using 10 combined aircraft, 3 from each of the I-400s and 2 each from the adapted vessels, to attack the Gatun locks. They decided to pick the Gatun locks on the Atlantic side as their first target. And the idea was they would go across to the north coast of Ecuador. And from there, they would launch their aircraft at roughly 0300 hours. Somewhere around that time, on preferably a moonlit night. So this sort of starts to sound very similar to Taranto and the attack on there carried out by the British back in 1940. the aircraft, without floats, because that extends their range, would fly at their best altitude of roughly 13,000 feet across South America, pretty much, to get to the northern coast of Colombia, roughly the vicinity of Colón, which they felt would be illuminated enough by its own lights to make it a visible navigational point. And on the Caribbean side, they would turn westwards, heading at roughly 270 degrees, then angle southwest and make their final approach to the canal locks at roughly dawn. Now, originally they had the idea that 2 aircraft would carry torpedoes and 8 would carry bombs, but only 1 pilot actually managed to get the torpedoing technique okay, so they went with an all-bomb approach. And the idea was they would all be carrying the biggest bombs. They would all be carrying those 850 kilogram bombs. And the idea would be, after they complete their bombing runs, they would return to a rendezvous point and ditch alongside the submarines where the aircrews would be picked up. That's their plan. In April 1945, they are pursuing with the plan, but at this point, the gentleman in charge of the plan, Captain Arizumi, decides the pilots should make kamikaze ramming attacks against the gates. This idea was that it would increase the likelihood of accuracy and likelihood of damage in the gates, and it was by this point a very common tactic. But this had already been suggested by their squadron leader earlier that month, but it was kept secret from the pilots, and it's only at the end of May, though, that when a pilot spots that the aircraft is having its bomb release mechanism removed and replacing the bomb release mechanism with a fixed mount, which allows the bomb to go off in the aircraft, that they realise the implications of this changes, and they actually confront their senior officers and are debating over this. And the decision we made not to tell the crews to avoid mental pressure on the air crews, but there's also a bit of a case of you don't want any of these people to back out. At this point, being a kamikaze, whilst seen as a great honour and a great thing to do, was very much still voluntary. In theory, it's one of those things of, it's more easy to make it you're happy to call for volunteers when you go, we need 20 volunteers, oh look, we have 20 people, rather than we're going on this mission where at the end you're going to a long mission, you're going to be away for months, and then you're going to sit at sea on a submarine, and then you're going to have to launch these strikes, and telling if you tell them at the end, they haven't really got much option. If you tell them at the beginning, they could go, oh, I have injured myself, I can no longer do this job, or they could just withdraw or get reassigned. And then you have to train up new pilots, and as I said, only one of the pilots had already been able to manage the torpedoing technique. They were worried about the quality of pilots they were getting through at this point, although this unit does seem to be getting fairly good quality pilots. They even start practicing against a full-scale wooden model of the Gatton locks, which had been built by Maizuru Naval Arsenal and placed on a raft and towed into the Nanawan Bay. And they are practicing. They are doing their best to get this up to standards, to get the capabilities there. But by the 20th of June 1945, when the training was ended and the operation was set to proceed, they changed their minds and they decided they're going to attack Ulufi Atoll because, frankly, Okinawa's fallen. And, well, the Japanese realised at that point, Okinawa's fallen. How long before they come for the home islands? Probably not long. So what can we hit now? Well, if we go take out their aircraft carriers, why do they think they're at a safe space, i.e. Ulufi Atoll, and take them out of that space, well, we can cause a lot of damage. Sadly enough, life doesn't always go as planned. It really doesn't. And this is really true of Operation Arashi. I think I've pronounced that right. or Mountain Storm, which is the name for the operation to attack Aleutian Atoll. Now, pretty much the timing goes wrong from the get-go. One of the submarines, not the 400s, one of the other submarines gets caught by an Avenger and sunk. And the two-phase plan starts to fall apart, but then the Japanese surrender. And that causes real trouble. It's how do you surrender the vessels? What do you do with them? Both I-400 and I-401 end up going through different processes of surrender. They have different stories about their surrenders, but it does involve a lot of whiskey on both sides, and it does involve valiant efforts made to make sure that these vessels, with their capabilities and technologies, do not fall into American hands. There is a real realization these vessels are something special. They've put a lot of effort into them. They do not want their technology to fall into the American hands. But it does. In the case of both, they do. One, because an engine breaks down, and so it can't escape the American submarine on the surface. The other one... yeah. But the atoll, the plan to, in two phases, sneak in close, paint aircraft, and this was another thing which caused trouble their own pilots. This is part of the problem with, I think, with the Japanese command structure at this point. They actually managed to upset their own pilots by repainting the aircraft in American colours to try and make it easier for them to slip in as kamikazes, and the Japanese pilots didn't like that. These are very proud, very honourable people in their minds and their view of themselves, and doing such things is not their way, and that caused trouble. Now, the last operation is the one which, frankly, we are probably most lucky didn't take place. And when I say we're most lucky didn't take place, it would have been absolutely devastating on some levels, but also what kind of warfare it would have opened up for the world could have been horrific. And the reason I say that is because the plan involved Sarin aircraft. That's the name of the... remember, the Aki Sarin aircraft is what's launching from these I-400s. Dropping weaponized bubonic plague, cholera, typhus, dengue fever, and anything else they could theoretically weaponize in terms of pathogens. And then the idea was that the submarine crews would also infect themselves and run ashore in a suicide mission as well to spread it. Now, the idea was that you attack American troops, you attack American forces in America, you attack their cities, and you denude their ability to fight a war. Now, traditionally, this has been an interesting point of view because there have been all sorts of perspectives put forward. One of them I read recently when talking about this was that it would have had no impact at all on American operations. I think if we can take any lesson from recent brushes, time-wise, and this is being recorded in 2024, with pathogens and large-scale health crises, governments do not really know how to deal with them. They are out of their normal scale of operations, their normal scope of operations. They do not have a large-scale infrastructure. In many ways, governments are far better prepared for wars than they are for pathogen outbreaks, because wars are something which they have armies, navies, air forces, all sorts of service professionals and civilian and civil servants, etc., who are constantly preparing for. Because it's a visible threat, it's a constant. Pathogens, when they happen, turn up, cause trouble, everyone panics, everyone does all sorts of things to deal with them, and then they go away, or at least they die down to an acceptable level, and very quickly everyone forgets and goes back to their regular life. Now, hopefully these things are once in a generation things. But let's consider this. We would be talking about a scenario where potentially multiple pathogens of differing types could be released at once on scale. Think about that. Multiple different types, different symptom spreads, different rates of decay, different rates of emergence within the target population. There is a chance you can get a handle on it quickly. And I don't think a single submarine launching 3 aircraft is going to rate this as a problem. But let's say if they had more of these submarines available, if they had got more of them, remember, they were theoretically in the I-400 class, theoretically, building 6. One is cancelled in October 1943, which was slightly further along. But there are at least 4 closer to coming to fruition. And you've got the conversions as well. So theoretically, if you had left 402, especially as an aviation vessel rather than a tanker, you could have theoretically, I've been talking about a strike group of between 16 and 20 aircraft from 6 to 8 submarines, including up to 4 conversions. "20 aircraft plus 20 submarines load of crews being offloaded into the American population and wandering around, actually actively seeking to get captured, actively seeking to go to spaces where there are lots of people, so they're going to get caught. But in that kerfuffle, maybe there's a fight, maybe their blood goes over the place, maybe. So while they're symptomless and you don't have any reason to suspect it, they're spreading their infection around. That could have opened up a whole new type of warfare. Or rather, could have led to a far greater fear of such threats, which could have caused all sorts of ramifications. So I think that's the one we're luckiest it didn't happen of these potential operations. The Alifi Atoll strike, you've spent months training everyone to do a Panama Canal strike, and now you're going to send them in for something completely different. Those skills are in some ways transferable, and they're probably going to do a good job, but I would have said myself, this is classic Japanese issues in World War II, in that the thing that's going to make cause most trouble for Japan is going to be an invasion, is going to be landing ships, which can bring the troops. And at this point, a lot of them are still not in the right place for the Pacific operations and the invasion of Japan. I just said blocking the Panama Canal and causing the disruption to supplies and other things from the east coast of the United States, so they have to go across the Atlantic, across the through the Mediterranean and through the Indian Ocean and come up that way, the long way around. Because let's be honest, a lot of those freighters are not really things you want to necessarily take around the south. You want to take into the far South Atlantic, or definitely not lower regions of water. Could have actually caused far more trouble for the build-up. But the Japanese are thinking about the strike capability, they're thinking about fighting capability, and so they're going after the carriers. And carriers are important. They're going to provide a necessary cover for those ships to go in. But let's put it this way: you take out even 5 of the carriers, you've caused a problem. But think about how many carriers are being built in Britain and America at this point. Think about how many aircraft carriers are on the slipways coming along. How long is 5 carriers damage really going to hold up either of those plans? But hundreds of merchant ships having to go the long way round, hundreds of landing ship tanks and other amphibious crafts having to go the long way around the world, all the ships which could be lost, all the time it takes picking out the right routes that landing ship tanks can actually cross during that weather, during that time. Ooh. That's going to cause disruptions all over the place. And then you've got the fact that the supplies which you have got out are going to be positioned in the wrong place for supporting those operations, so you're going to have to move them. It's just a logistical nightmare. It would be dealt with. But I honestly think actually replacing 5 carriers in the roster, either through repair or building new ones, is actually easier. This is going to be question 2 of today's topic. Which do you think causes more trouble to the Allies in 1945? 5 carriers being damaged or lost in the Luffy Atoll, or the Panama Canal strike? I have a feeling a fair number of you might actually agree with me when you think about it. But I will look forward to the cases either way in the comments. So here's a summary point, and this is where things get kind of intriguing for me, because how do you summarize this class? I would argue, as I've already said from the beginning, they were an idea conceived too late. They perfectly fit into Japanese doctrine, they perfectly fit into a lot of Navy's doctrine. And the fact that the Japanese don't have them available at the beginning of the war is another reason for me to think that the Yamato class, as gorgeous as they are, were massive drains on Japanese resources, both intellectual and physical and industrial, I would add into it, in terms of warship production. They were massive drains. They're always going to be. But because they're building them, so many other things don't get built. And whilst I cannot necessarily argue this design wouldn't get built, the fact that this design comes to fruition quite so quickly, when you consider how complicated it is, as a design, suggests to me that the idea has been knocking around for quite a while. The official timeline is that Yamato has the idea after Pearl Harbor, and within a couple of months there's a full design study done, with information that's been drawn from all over places to produce it and the basis for it to be put through, to the level at which the naval staff agree to it and all sign off on it. I'm not saying that the Japanese don't have absolute wizards of naval officers and engineers who could be capable of producing such a thing. I'm just fairly certain that the vast majority of them are mortal human beings, and it's going to take a lot longer than that period to produce such a report. And why wouldn't they be doing something like this? Let's be honest, it fits Japanese doctrine to a T. There it's all about the attritional warfare. This starts off the attrition at the enemy coast. This starts off the attrition at the other coast of the enemy. Not even the west coast. This can start off your attrition at the east coast of the Americans, because the Americans now have to secure the east coast. They can't just go, oh yes, we can send all our resources to the Pacific because, you know, the Japanese know threat to the Atlantic. No, suddenly there's a Japanese submarines turning up off the Atlantic coast and attacking targets. It fits so well with the Japanese attrition strategy of trying to divide the enemy, of denuding the enemy of resources and forcing them to sacrifice their advantage of mass to cover multiple targets, that it surely cannot have been thought of so late, that it's after they've done things. There is a possibility, but the timeline to me and my study and understanding of how these ships, and especially complicated ideas, work through processes, even in wartime, and especially at the beginning of wartime when they're not really that desperate, it's pushing one. It's really pushing it. So therefore, to me, it's not a bad idea. There is a reasonable argument for having it. Whether there's a reasonable argument for making it during the middle of a war, that is a bigger debate. I would say if you had them already in service prior to the war, you already had some, and you were still building them, yes, keep it up. Keep it up and keep using them. Keep causing the enemy trouble. Keep forcing the enemy to divide their resources and concentrate on home defense. There is nothing wrong. Introducing it suddenly at the end point of the war when they were coming through, I'm going to have to go waste resources at that point. They are. It's a glorious idea. It's a glorious capability, but it's. They're laid down in January 1943. They're launched. This is for I-400 in January 1944. Completed December 1944. So you're pretty much talking 2 years to build and get into service. Yeah. If you had been telling me they laid them down in 1939 or 1938, maybe they got the first 10 in service, not full 18 in service before war began, I would think they had a masterstroke, because I can see all the capabilities and options these systems bring. Honestly, I could see also, once their services, they start implementing it, I could see the US Navy and the Royal Navy kicking themselves for not having their own capabilities such as that. Because again, it's a wonderful capability in the initial strikes and to cause trouble for the enemy. And let's be honest, for the Royal Navy, causing trouble for the enemy is basically their entire raison d'etre. In peacetime, you're just able to wind people up. In wartime, you can cause full-out problems. It's brilliant. And for the US Navy, it's a chance to be really inventive. They love these ideas. They're going to be sitting there looking at the Japanese capability and going, oh, it's one thing I really wanted. Do they necessarily build it in wartime? Probably not. But they're going to really go, would have liked that capability. That's going to be a capability they covered. And the reason they won't build anything, or build it themselves, is because they'll be building the counters for it. Long-range maritime patrol aircraft, fixed radar positions, and fighter bases, and probably a lot of destroyers or sloops out wandering around the oceans going, hello? So, I would say it's a good idea executed too late. It needed to come into service prior to the war. And I think it's an idea they'd had before. Because also, when you look at some of their cruiser submarine designs or some of their design studies, they've been heading in the direction for a while. This was not something which came out of nowhere. Japanese submarine sizes were growing almost constantly in their design specs from the 1920s onwards. And yeah, this is where they were going to. It truly is. So, as said before, this is part of the pneumonia recovery schedule. I'm slowly getting better. Slowly able to record for longer periods. I still get interrupted by coughing. That's why this is probably seemed a bit bitty at certain points, because sometimes I just start coughing out of nowhere. It's getting better, but I know this was supposed to come out on Thursday. I had a version. I didn't like it. And I got back on Thursday from my trip home, or rather to the old home, and yeah, Friday kind of got away from me with dealing with all the things which have built up in the 4 days I've been away, because I'm not currently well enough to do the trips in one go. I would drive 6 hours home and back and not bother it. May stay overnight back there, but just do the drive. But no, I'm having to break it up halfway, and it's not fun. But that I am not scheduled to do that for a few more weeks. So yeah, the rest should not be too problematic in terms of their timing. Hopefully, Supercarriers and Specialists will be Tuesday, and the British Submarines vs Axis Warships is going to be on Thursday. Got some books for that. I think I've located the right box of books for that, and I've got some of the shelving on this trip from Drac. He's given me, so I've got that shelving to put up, and once that's put up, then I'm going to sort out more boxes, some of the boxes onto the shelves, and then I'm going to order some of the shelving from IKEA to be delivered. The plan is to sort of slowly do it in phases, because otherwise I'll have a whole load of shelving to build and a whole load of boxes, and I won't have the space. Whereas if I get the shelving in, get rid of some of the boxes by putting the books onto the shelves, I then have some more space so I can get in it. So I'm trying to do it sensibly. And Brew Ships 161, that will be on Sunday. And I'm also hoping to do a Twitch stream tomorrow. So I'm hoping to do both Twitch and to do Brew Ships tomorrow. And Brew Ships tomorrow, I'm still deciding what its title is going to be, but I have a feeling. I do have a feeling it's gonna be My Books Need a Calyx, My Books Need a Calyx, or something like that. I'm working through various song titles. And that's literally what I'm working for, the bookshelves. Because at the moment, all the donations, everything that comes in, are going towards bookshelves. And there are lots of them needed for this place, because this place is going to be entirely my office. My upstairs is where my bedroom is going to be, where my shower room will eventually be, where there will be a spare bedroom / living room space with a sofa bed, and my kitchen's going to be at the back over there. So this is all my space. But you can tell I've been to IKEA at least recently, because I had to pick up a load of spares. And, well, apparently I had to get a shark for someone, so while I got a shark for them, which I picked up, I picked up a new friend for me. This, along with the fluffy torpedo, are going to be used in future videos, so it's an important work purchase. Truly is. Still working out what videos you're going to be used in, but I'm sure I'll come with some. Right. Thank you very much, everyone, for your support. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching. And what have we got coming up? Let's see. We have the Supercarriers and Specialists, which originally was going to be the 3rd of September, but that's now going to be slightly later. 820 Squadron is the one which was deleted from the videos. Basically, I decided 820 Squadron would make a good Christmas video, so I basically said, looked through the video list and went, right, what can I make into a good Christmas video? 820 will do for a Christmas video. Because 820 is another squadron I have spent personal time with. 845, 820, they are lovely squadrons, and 820 was a true pleasure to spend time with when I was younger. And then we've got October's videos, which includes the Kuznetsov and some Soviet naval aviation, and the French and other nations' World War II carrier naval aviation. Hopefully that's going to be an interesting video. That doctrine, that's going to be a fun one. And there is going to be, at some point in November, the 2 historians, the Royal Navy that could have been, with a special guest, Naval. Basically, him and I talking about the Malta class and various other things. Probably we will get on to various other things being the emphasis here. Who knows where we'll come to. Yes, and I have shown my British history, my British sense of humour, that I've the final conception, operation, conclusion of this year is the Queen Elizabeth class, which led to it raised an interesting point, because someone in the comment recently said a definition of a modern aircraft carrier is they have to be nuclear powered. Thinking of the vast number of modern aircraft carriers which are not nuclear powered, I don't really think you can make that as a claim, but it was an interesting thing to say, and I'm probably going to deal with it in a scuttlebutt. Probably. Might stay. I'm not sure. I can't remember if it's from a Keyshit's video or not. But yeah, I think it's. I don't think it's from a Keyshit's video, so I think I can deal with it in scuttlebutt. And so it's probably going to be discussed in the next scuttlebutt, which will be recorded at some point next week and will go up hopefully at some point on a Wednesday this month. Thank you very much for watching. Take care, everyone, and thank you again for all your support. Toodles.